The black belt asked a janitor to fight with him for fun. What happened next made the whole martial arts gym quiet. "Hey, you cleaning there! How about a quick fight?" shouted Derek Mitchell from the middle of the mat. His black belt shined under the gym lights. "I bet you've never seen a real fight before." James Washington stopped mopping the floor and looked up slowly. He was 42 years old and had worked as a janitor in that gym for only 3 weeks. He usually came after class was over, but that Thursday night the advanced class was still training. "I don't want to bother you, Sensei," James said calmly as he kept scrubbing a tough stain. "I'm just finishing here so you can continue." Derek laughed loudly, the sound bouncing through the gym. "Everyone, look! He's too scared to even step on the mat." The 8 students laughed, though some looked uneasy. Derek didn't know James's secret. For 20 years, James had tried to forget who he really was. He had left fighting after an accident that changed his life forever. Even his daughter didn't know the truth. "Come on, man," Derek pushed, walking closer with a proud smile. "Just a small show. I bet you don't even know how to block. Show my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans." James felt something stir inside him, like an old muscle waking up. His eyes met Derek's, and for a moment, Derek stepped back without meaning to. "Just a short demonstration," Derek said again, but now his voice was less sure. "Nothing serious, just to show why martial arts deserve respect." Share in the comments where in the world you're watching this story from. If you felt the message, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story of hope and second chances. James put the bucket down and stood up slowly. His body moved smoothly, not like a man who had never trained. The student stopped practicing and stared. "All right," James said calmly, "like quiet water before a storm. But when we finish, you will apologize to them for turning this gym into a joke." Derek laughed again, but it sounded forced. "Apologize? You'll be the one apologizing to the floor when you hit it." None of them knew James's past. He had once been James Silent Storm Washington, 5-time world MMA champion. He had retired at his peak after an accident that killed his best friend and training partner. Since then, he had promised never to fight again. But sometimes promises are broken when respect is on the line. "If you like this story of strength and justice," the narrator added, "don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how prejudice turned into the most humiliating moment of Derek Mitchell's life." Derek adjusted his belt, enjoying the attention. "Gather around, everyone. You'll see why there is a hierarchy in martial arts." The 8 students formed a half circle. Some looked excited, others worried. A young Asian woman whispered to her partner, who shook his head. "Look at this," Derek said proudly. "Here we have someone who doesn't understand his place. Elite gyms are not for, well, you know." James felt the same pain in his chest he had felt 20 years ago, hearing similar insults. But now, at 42, he knew how to turn anger into strength. "Sensei Derek," the young woman spoke softly, "maybe we should continue normal training. It's late." "And Sarah Chun," Derek cut her off sharply. "Are you questioning my methods? Sit down and watch. You'll learn more in the next 5 minutes than in a whole month." James noticed how Derek used her full name to show power. He also saw the fear in her eyes. James saw the same look he had seen in the mirror 20 years ago. The night he woke in panic, remembering the accident that killed his best friend and training partner, Tony "Hammer" Rodriguez. Tony had died because of him. James had hit too hard during sparring. Tony fell, hit his head on the floor, and never woke up. The investigation called it an accident, but James knew the truth. He had lost control because of pressure and racist shouts from the crowd. "So, janitor," Derek sneered, "show my students a simple guard. Or is that too hard for someone who only knows how to push a mop?" Laughter filled the gym, but James stayed still. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in that Las Vegas ring, hearing the same insults that came before the tragedy. "What's wrong?" "Afraid?" Derek pressed, walking around James like a hunter circling prey. "Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost with a mop in your hand?" Then Derek made his first big mistake. He gave James a light push on the shoulder. It looked harmless, but it carried arrogance. James didn't move at all. His feet were firm, like roots in the ground. Derek felt as if he had tried to push a wall of stone. His smile weakened for a second. "Interesting," James whispered, more to himself than to Derek. "It's been a long time since someone tried to provoke me like that." His voice wasn't angry or threatening. It was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes from surviving very dark times. The whole atmosphere changed. Derek didn't see the danger. He laughed louder. "Did you hear that, guys? He thinks it's interesting. Let's show him the difference between thinking and knowing." But with every insult, James was waking up inside. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something stronger. The clear memory of who he really was when he stopped hiding. Sarah Chun watched, feeling uneasy. She noticed the way James breathed, the way his muscles tightened slightly. It reminded her of Predator documentaries on Discovery Channel. "The calm before the strike. Last chance," Derek said angrily. "Fight me or I'll call security." "You'll lose your job too." James opened his eyes slowly. When he looked at Derek, the instructor shivered. It felt like he had awakened a dragon he thought was only a harmless lizard. "All right," James said at last. His voice was quiet but full of power. Everyone went silent at once. "But when we finish," James said, "you will explain to your students why you turned a place of learning into a circus of humiliation." Derek laughed, but this time it sounded nervous. "Explain? Man, you'll be the one explaining, when you're lying on the floor." What neither man knew was that James had spent 20 years not just running from his past, but learning deep control over his emotions. He had turned his old anger into something stronger, calm, sharp, and far more dangerous. Every insult only made him steadier, building a cold determination his old opponents knew well. But Derek was about to learn the hard way. Derek straightened his back, enjoying the silence in the gym. His 8 students stood in a circle around the mat. Some looked eager, others uneasy. "Everyone," Derek said like a performer, arms wide, "you are about to see a lesson worth more than 6 months of training. The difference between real martial artists and janitors who only clean the floor." James stood still on the mat, but his breathing changed. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he wasn't in Denver anymore. He was back in Las Vegas, 22 years earlier, before his world title fight against Victor, the Demolition Man, Petrov. That night, someone in the crowd had shouted, "Look at that little black guy. He won't last 3 rounds against a real fighter." James had proved them wrong, winning by knockout in the second round. But the pressure of those racist words stayed with him. Later in training, he lost control. That mistake had led to Tony Rodriguez's death. "So, janitor," Derek sneered, circling James like a predator, "show my students how not to do a guard. Or is that too hard for someone who only knows how to push a mop?" That was when Sarah Chun couldn't stay quiet anymore. She was a 22-year-old purple belt in jiu-jitsu and a master's student in sports psychology. For her thesis, she had been studying cases of discrimination in sports for 2 years. What she was seeing now was not only useful research, it was deeply disturbing. "Sensei Derek," she said firmly, "can I ask you something?" Sarah said, "Why do you think it's necessary to humiliate someone who is just doing his job?" The silence in the gym was heavy. Derek turned to her slowly, his eyes sharp with surprise and irritation. "Excuse me, Sarah," he said coldly. "Who's teaching this class?" "You are," she answered calmly. "But teaching should not include racial humiliation disguised as a demonstration." The students looked at each other nervously. No one had ever spoken against Derek before. His face turned red with anger and shame. "Racial?" Derek forced a laugh. "This isn't about race. It's about respect for martial arts and knowing your place." James opened his eyes. Sarah's courage reminded him of his younger sister, Kesha, who also never accepted injustice quietly. Kesha had died at 17, hit by a stray bullet during a police shootout in her neighborhood. James had been in Japan competing when he got the news. Another loved one gone while he chased glory in faraway rings. Another reason he chose to abandon fighting and live quietly. "Sarah," Derek said in a low, threatening voice, "if you can't respect my teaching, maybe you should find another gym. There are places better suited for people with your mentality." The threat hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt a chill, but she didn't move. My tuition is paid, Sensei, she said firmly, and I believe everyone here deserves a place to learn with respect, not humiliation. Then James did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't nervous or weak. It was slow and deliberate. The smile of a man who had finally found a reason to stop hiding. For 20 years, he had carried guilt for 2 deaths linked to his fighting career. Now, watching a brave young woman defend justice, the very principles he had given up long ago, James Washington began to remember who he truly was. "Derek," James said at last. His voice was calm but full of authority, and everyone in the gym turned to him. "The young lady is right. This isn't about martial arts. It's about you trying to feel important by putting others down." Derek spun around, his face red with anger. "How dare you lecture me about martial arts? You don't even know what a dojo is." James took one step forward. Something changed in the way he stood. His shoulders straightened, his weight lowered, and his feet shifted into a stance every real fighter would recognize as flawless. "Actually," James said calmly, "I know exactly what a dojo is, and I know this place stopped being one a long time ago." A cold shiver ran down Derek's spine. Something in James's movements triggered his survival instincts, but Derek's pride kept him from backing away. "Enough talking," Derek growled, moving into his favorite fighting stance. "I'll teach you respect the hard way." Sarah watched with both fear and fascination. She had studied hundreds of hours of sparring for her research, and the way the janitor moved reminded her of the great masters from history. His movements were simple, his breathing steady, his presence calm but full of hidden power. James closed his eyes and let 22 years of muscle memory return. Every technique, every victory, every hard lesson from the toughest rings in the world. When he opened them again, Derek was staring into the eyes of Silent Storm Washington, 5-time world MMA champion. "Last chance to apologize," James said gently. "To her, to your students, and to make this place a place of learning again." Derek laughed, but it came out nervous and weak. "Apologize? Man, you'll be the one begging for forgiveness on the floor." What Derek didn't realize was that James had already seen every weakness in him. His high guard left his body open. He always stepped back with his right leg first. His punches were easy to read because his shoulder moved before every strike. 22 years away had not erased decades of skill and sharp analysis. Sarah noticed the students slowly stepping back, like animals sensing a storm was about to break. The energy in the room had completely changed. It felt like the air was charged, waiting for a lightning strike. When the students laughed at Derek's latest insult, something different appeared on James's face. It wasn't anger or revenge. It was calm determination. The look of a man who had finally found a reason strong enough to break a 20-year vow. Some students began to sense that something unusual was about to happen, even if they didn't understand why. Derek moved into his usual fighting stance, the one he always used to scare beginners. Feet apart, fists at his chest, body leaning forward. A stance made for practice halls and predictable opponents. James stood still, simply watching. His eyes scanned Derek from head to toe, noting every weakness. The open ribs, the shaky balance, the stiff shoulders that gave away each move before it started. "Still waiting," Derek sneered, bouncing lightly on his feet. "Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost?" Then James moved. It wasn't big or flashy. He just shifted his feet, lowered his center slightly, and let his shoulders relax into a perfect line. To the untrained eye, it looked small, but to anyone who understood fighting, it was terrifying. Sarah felt a chill. After 2 years studying sports biomechanics, she knew what she was seeing. In one instant, the janitor had turned into a predator. The change was subtle, but devastating. "Interesting," Derek muttered, his confidence slipping for the first time. Something about the way James now held himself triggered his instincts to stay safe. James took one step forward, and Derek stepped back without thinking. The reaction was so natural, so automatic, that the students noticed. A black belt retreating from a janitor. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. "Problem?" James asked quietly, his voice calm but commanding. The room went silent. Derek felt his face burn with embarrassment. His authority was slipping in front of his own students. He couldn't back down, even though deep inside he wanted to stop and apologize. "No problem," Derek said, forcing a smile. "Just admiring your posture," Derek said. "Did you learn that on YouTube?" The joke failed. No one laughed. The room was heavy with tension. "Actually," James answered calmly, "I learned it at a place called the Las Vegas National Gym. Maybe you've heard of it." Derek frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't remember why. "Las Vegas? What kind of weekend boot camp did you do there?" Quietly, Sarah took out her phone and typed Las Vegas National Gym Martial Arts. What she saw froze her blood. This wasn't a casual camp. It was the gym where the greatest MMA champions of the last 30 years had trained. "Derek," James continued, still calm, "this is your last chance. Apologize to Sarah for silencing her. Apologize to your students for turning this place into a circus. And most of all, apologize to yourself for becoming exactly what martial arts should protect you from." His words hung in the air like smoke. Derek had the chance to be humble, to admit he was wrong, to save his dignity. But instead, he attacked. Derek's first punch was sharp and precise. A perfect jab, fast and accurate, just like he had practiced for years. Against almost anyone, it would have worked. But James was not almost anyone. The move was so smooth, so fast, that most of the students didn't even understand what they had seen. James simply wasn't where the punch had landed. He had slid to the side like water moving around a rock. Derek's arm cut through empty air, leaving him off balance. "Nice try," James said softly, already standing steady again. "Good technique, decent speed, but your shoulder gave it away." Derek spun around wildly, trying to find his opponent. How did he move so fast? "Beginner's luck," Derek muttered to himself. Then he struck again. Jab, straight, hook. 3 punches in quick succession, his favorite combination, practiced thousands of times. The same move he used to finish sparring sessions and impress his students. But again, James wasn't there. This time, Sarah's trained eyes followed the movement. James dipped slightly, letting the jab sail over his head. Then he leaned back with impossible control, making the straight punch miss completely. When Derek swung the hook with all his strength, James only stepped back a little. The fist missed his chin by millimeters. "Interesting combination," James said calmly, still breathing steady. "It works against people who don't move, but you're leaving your left side wide open." Sweat ran down Derek's face. Something was wrong. He had thrown thousands of punches in his life, but now he couldn't land a single one on a man who was supposed to be just a janitor. "Stop dancing and fight," Derek shouted, throwing an even more aggressive chain of punches. James decided the demonstration had gone on long enough. Derek's third attack, a desperate mix of punches and kicks, hit nothing but air. And this time, when Derek tried to recover, James was already closer. "How?" Derek whispered, realizing he had lost control of the distance. "Derek," James said softly, now only an arm's length away. "Do you want to know the difference between someone who trains in gyms and someone who fights in real rings?" Before Derek could answer, James did something that seemed to break the laws of physics. He didn't hit hard. He didn't even look like he used strength. With a simple touch of his palm to Derek's chest, Derek flew backwards. He wasn't pushed. He was launched, as if hit by an invisible wave. His feet lifted off the ground. He flew almost 2 meters and crashed on his back. The sound made everyone gasp. Silence filled the room. Derek lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand. There was no pain, only the shocking force of someone operating on a completely different level. "That's impossible," Derek muttered, struggling to sit up. Sarah Chun's breath caught in her throat. In 2 years of studying martial arts, she had never seen such controlled, devastating power. No rage, no brutality, just precise technique she had only heard of in legends. "Actually," James said calmly, offering his hand to Derek, "it's simple. Leverage, timing, and energy transfer. Principles I learned in a 22-year professional career." Derek ignored the hand and got up on shaky legs. 22 years. Professional career in what?" he asked. You don't know who he is, do you? Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. She still held her phone with the results of her search. On the screen were articles, photos, and videos. Sarah read aloud, James Washington, also known as Silent Storm, five-time world mixed martial arts champion, considered one of the most technical fighters in history, retired undefeated after a 22-year career, following an accident that killed his training partner. The words hit the room like a bomb. Derek's face turned pale as he realized the truth. He had challenged a living legend. He had mocked a man who could have beaten him with ease. Five-time world champion, Derek stammered, his arrogance gone. James nodded quietly. I retired at 29. Since then, I've worked whatever jobs I could find. Cleaning, maintenance, simple jobs. A simple life. No spotlight, no cameras. No need to prove anything. The change in Derek was painful to watch. The proud man was gone, replaced by someone who finally saw the weight of his mistake. I didn't know, Derek whispered. If you had known, James interrupted gently, would you have treated me with respect? Or would you still have humiliated some other janitor, someone without titles to protect him? The question cut deeper than any punch. Derek understood. The problem wasn't ignorance of James's past. It was his arrogance, believing he could shame people based on their jobs. Sarah stepped forward, her voice strong. Sensei Derek, I've trained here for 2 years out of respect for your experience. But what I saw today wasn't teaching. It was bullying disguised as instruction. Other students nodded, whispering in agreement. The truth about James had changed how everyone saw the scene. James? Derek finally said, his voice humble in a way no one had heard before. I sincerely apologize. To you, to Sarah, to everyone. I have no excuse. James nodded, accepting with calm dignity. Thank you, Derek. But apologies are only the first step. The real question is, what will you do differently from now on? Derek looked around the room. His students' eyes showed disappointment, doubt, and re-evaluation. I'll change, Derek promised. It will take time, but I'll change. Then Sarah asked something that surprised everyone. Mr. Washington, would you consider teaching again? I think we could all learn more from someone who knows that real strength comes with responsibility. James smiled, his first true smile of the night. Maybe, but not just to teach fighting. To teach something more important. That respect isn't earned with belts or titles, but with character. As Derek absorbed the most humbling lesson of his life, one question remained. Would one night of humility be enough to erase years of arrogance? Or would deeper change be needed? 3 months later, the gym was completely different. James Washington was no longer just the janitor. Sarah convinced the owner to hire him as an instructor, teaching advanced techniques and the philosophy of martial arts. Derek Mitchell lost half his students in the first week. The video Sarah had quietly recorded spread across social media, showing a black belt humbled by a janitor. His reputation was destroyed. Sensei James, Sarah said one evening after a lesson on respect and humility. Thank you for showing me that true strength doesn't need to be shown off to be real. James smiled as he quietly put the equipment away. The best lesson I can teach is this, James said. Never judge someone by their job or their looks. Everyone has a story that may surprise you. Derek kept teaching, but only at a smaller gym. His pride was gone, replaced by the humility that public shame had forced on him. He had learned that arrogance always comes with a price. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It arrives quietly, like a storm that changes everything without noise. James showed that real revenge is not about destroying your opponent, but proving that true greatness comes from character, not titles. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel to hear more about how ordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.